Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to discuss Opus 25, number 12. This is Chopin Etude, and I don't want to do a lot of run-in because I want to get to the many technical issues that are encountered here, but I want to say a few words. We'll be looking at various components and how they combine to produce speed and ease across the keyboard. As we uncover different components, we will see how these elements form a sort of structure of solutions based on shared issues, and then implementing special applications where relevant. The Etude Opus 12 the Etude number 12 from his Opus 25 collection was the last of his formal studies for the piano. The collection was first published in 1837. It was nicknamed Ocean, but it is actually Opus 25, number 12. I just wanted to read a few of the practice tips that I was able to find online regarding this piece, because I would like you to keep in mind that when we're showing things, this is really helping to form and to shape the way in which your practice session goes. First thing I want to say is that we always come from the point of view, if somebody plays a passage and it feels fine and it sounds fine, we leave it alone. So I'm not saying that what I'm showing is an absolute method, but particularly for teaching, we need to know a lot of details. In case a student encounters a problem, we need to know what the solution is. Also, when you have this sort of skills building up, you solve the passage much quicker than just not knowing these things. So there's always a dialogue that a pianist is having between themselves, the technique, and what's happening. And they're asking the question, am I doing that? And if the body responds yes, then there's no need to keep repeating that or take it apart more. So I just wanted to say some of the things online to be helpful. These are things that people have written to be helpful. Is this Opus 12, number 12 is a series of rising and falling 16th note arpeggio patterns, which explore a range of chord progressions within the key of C minor. The whole piece, minus the coda, is full of rolling 16th patterns. The start of the bars are accentuated, creating a more dramatic flourish of notes, especially at the beginning. The Etude is noted for reaching large lengths of the piano in one-bar phrases and makes it devilishly difficult to play. Now, in order to play it evenly, I would suggest practicing using two different touches, Martellato and Leggiero. So one is to kind of force into the instrument, and the other is to play as lightly as possible. Martellato is done somewhat slowly with an active finger and comes out a forte or fortissimo level. Each note is accented. Slightly raise each finger so it can grasp the key firmly, consciously switching off effort after each note and constantly checking in with your arms and shoulders, in parentheses, which should remain loose at all times. So you can see that all of these things are what I term extrinsic solution. This is trying to give a method or something that you apply onto something in the hopes that it will solve it. So in a way, you kind of do these things, and then there'll be a day that you'll wake up and suddenly you'll be able to play the passage. I want you to think about the approach here to solving the problems. We're looking at the music as it's written, we're looking at the body as it's built, and we're looking at that relationship between the body and the instrument, which gives us the science of alignment and movement, which is the basis of the solution of the passages. So it can go on and on with all of these kinds of suggestions, but you get the sort of spirit of it. So I wanted to begin with just saying, the opening, most of the piece, is written in 3-note melodic and physical groups over steady 16th notes, which are 4 per beat. We would say that the physical grouping is in mostly threes, and the meter is over 4/16 notes to the beat. So physically speaking, you have 3 notes and another 3 and another 3. Metrically speaking, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is where the meter and the grouping are not exactly beginning and ending at the same time. You need actually both, and it's really the beauty of the piece. If he didn't do that, it would be quite an ordinary piece of lining up the melodic structure with the metric structure in a way that doesn't shift anything. Provides enormous amount of interest that way. It creates a kind of inner syncopation that makes the passage sparkle in the way that the melody and the rhythm lining up would not. So let's talk about the first component. By the way, many of these things came because with the pandemic, there was sort of this resurgence in my studio of interest in Chopin etudes. So this was an etude that several people took, and I found it interesting that people had actually different questions and different problems in different places. And what resulted was a deeper look into what's going on here. So one of the most basic things and helpful things is to consider the torso. When we consider the torso in this piece, it's quite obvious that the piece starts here and goes up to here and back. So it's not possible for the torso to remain rigid. The torso has to move from the left, slightly to the right, and then feel that it begins to go the other way. So that's fairly simple thing to do, which can help facilitate the passage very much, because if the torso stays rigid, then your arm, finger hand, and forearm cannot pass easily from register to register. This causes the finger, hand, and arm to adjust to different registers, which we call the walking hand and forearm. This is usually combined, of course, with other elements, but just speaking of the walking hand and forearm, you have a moment here where the arms can shift to another place, and obviously in the descending pattern also. That moment is really at the repeated note. At the repeated note, the walking hand and arm takes a new adjustment. All of these things are very, very small, but very necessary. Let's talk about the rotational elements of the piece. There are a few things here helpful in terms of understanding and looking out for certain things rotationally. Meaning, of course, that we begin every passage with a preparatory motion and a single rotation to the second note. But as we go through the passage, you understand how important this double rotation is, because one of the pitfalls of this piece would be to advise somebody to just roll over the 3 notes. By just thinking that you just roll over a group of notes will create enormous unevenness, which then would send somebody into a kind of tailspin of how to get it even. So one of the key factors in playing it evenly is to understand that this is a double rotation from the 2nd 16th note to the 3rd 16th note. And then from the 3rd 16th note back to the 4th 16th note, we have a single rotation. But that single rotation is very important because it's opposite to the overall direction of the passage. So if there's a particular rotation, maybe to just check, it may be functioning fine, but just check it. It would be that moment opposite to the direction of the passage and also coming down now. This rotation opposite to the direction of the passage. Now, when we work the rotation out in, say, a Mozart sonata or a concerto or something, that gives you a basic internalized sense of rotation. We never go back to learning pieces and going back to these big kind of motions. When you're checking something, once the rotation has been internalized, it's just a tuning in. It's just asking yourself, am I complete on that double rotation? And your body will answer you. It will say, oh no, that doesn't feel so settled. And sometimes a simple message to the body, just settle there, can really trigger the right thing. Because if you've learned to rotate properly and you've learned to minimize and internalize rotation properly, it is in your body, and it doesn't need exaggeration in future pieces to be able to function. It functions very nicely. Sometimes we have to remind ourselves, but it functions nicely. Now, that brings us to the notion of the in and out. So we're actually going to spend quite a bit of time on just this first measure, because in a way it gives a kind of roadmap for many of the other measures. But if we look at the in and out, there's something very interesting here, which is, if I look at the right hand, I need to come out very little, but I need to come out to the second finger. If I go in, I'm going to feel very stuck. So the second finger is an out motion, and the fifth finger is an out with a forward back to the thumb. So that's what we call our dual function finger. The 5 would not feel very good getting to the thumb if it were a pure out. It would feel like a very big motion to get into the thumb. We have to go into the thumb, it's short, so we can't obviously continue out to the thumb. What happens on the note before really affects the thumb and the feeling of security on the thumb. If I made it a pure forward, then what will happen in the body is that the body will fall out to the thumb, and that doesn't feel very good. So this dual function finger really makes the thumb feel very nice and secure. But I am coming out a little bit to the 2. And of course, it does it again. And here it does it, but at the top, we have a forward to this 5. That forward to the 5, and we'll talk about in a moment, is part of shaping, really. But let's look at the left hand for a moment at the beginning. That second finger is going in, forward or in. It's really a very small in or a forward. That's opposite to what's happening in the upper part. So what's very confusing for people sometimes is that they hear a kind of similarity in the musical design, and the brain says, oh, their hands are doing the same things. So one hand is actually, in a way, forcing the other hand to conform to it, and that doesn't feel very good or easy in speed. What's really helpful here is just to tune into that opposite moment. The left hand's a little bit forward, the right hand's a little bit out. And then on the way down, we have the opposite issue, or the opposite situation. This is now going in, and this is now you're out. Forward, in, out. So basically, your second fingers play a role here in feeling opposites. In terms of shaping, we have the beginning shape here is a 1, 2, 3, 4 note overshape. This is very common for people to make this error here, which is to hear a melody going up and the body automatically makes some kind of undershape. We have to look at the nature of that when it causes the problems that it causes. What does that cause? If this were going back maybe to here, we would have that undershape. But the fact that it's coming directly back to the thumb is the issue here. Now, when I make an undershape, it's pulling my thumb way away from where it has to play next. When I make an overshape, can you see it brings my thumb right to where I need it? So we're always looking for the minimal effort for the maximum results. So here we don't want to do this and twist back to our thumb and have to come way into the thumb. Here, with the overshape, it brings us right to it. And that will continue in the next one. But now here we have a situation where you have to turn direction here. So when we turn the direction, we're doing a 3-note undershape. It's very narrow, what we call a narrow undershape. It's not a big swooping kind of physical shape that goes way low and way high. It's very lateral. And that gives a nice smoothness and ability to come back with an overshape. So that is what's happening in the upper part. In the lower part, it starts with a 3-note overshape, and then it goes to a 4-note. 2. Now, for new people, they might be hearing me say 3s and 4s and all these numbers. What does that all mean? You'll hear a lecture on shaping tomorrow, but just to give you some basis for what I'm talking about, we have shapes very often that are determined by number. Some are odd numbers in the shape, some are even numbers in the shape. When we have an odd number in a shape, we have the high point of the finger, hand, and forearm on a specific note. When we have an even number in the shaping, the high point is occurring between 2 notes, sort of in the middle. So in this case, we have a 3-note over followed by a 4-note. So the last note of one shape becomes number 1 of the next shape. So shaping, they interlock. So this now is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and then back 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now you get the opposite of what happened. You get the same thing that happened in the right hand in the opposite hand. So we have 3-note under, 3-note over. And that will help it change direction. I would say also that there's another kind of grouping, if we go back to grouping, which is from the high note by direction. All of these notes are going up. Now I'm going down. I'm going up. Now I'm going down. So we have that issue to add to the mix too. When we talk about putting the hands together, well, actually, I'd like to talk about one other thing: repeated notes. So in this opening and most of the piece, we have a repeated note situation, which is happening at the same time in both hands. We have a note that's going to be repeated with 2 different fingers. So all the laws of movement, the rotation functions, all of what I talked about, the in and out function, everything else functions. But we also very often have to tune into something else, which is, does the first note send us to the second note? Sending is a very delicate moment because you need enough forearm to settle, but not so much forearm that you get stuck. So you have to feel this kind of moment where you have the support of the forearm in a way that gives you solidity, but also sends you forward. When we're talking about repeated notes, some of the other things to be conscious of is that we should not go very high off the instrument. This repeated note in particular must be felt almost like what we would call a riding of the key. How minimally can you do it? It's happening in great speed. If there's an abrupt staccato that disassociates you from the instrument, that's also going to impede the speed of it. So the repeated note has a settling and ascending, but it also is not heavy, and it's not far from the key. This brings us to another issue, which is interdependence. And one of the things that can be really helpful in this particular etude is, although the hand position changes in the music at the same time, and that's important to understand, this moment is happening at the same time. The position is changing and we're going to another register. We can actually send very subtly one hand slightly ahead of the other, so that we're not actually experiencing two hands doing the same thing at the same time. So it's very interesting that the right hand being the one that would need to move first, because it's just kind of obvious if you move the left, you would be moving into the right's territory. You can just send the right a little bit ahead, and the same thing with the left hand on the way down, sending the left a little bit ahead. So that can help very much in terms of putting the hands together. Also in the interdependence, I have to say, I think I've mentioned it before, feeling that one opposite moment of the second fingers is extremely, extremely helpful. We have some other things to be aware of. For instance, when we go from measure 2 into measure 3 into measure 4, we're coming down. We have to move inside in order to get to this thumb. If you get caught out here, that's going to be a twist. I'll show you from above. So it's very important not to remain here, because that will create a very big twist to your thumb. So what's happening on the way down here, we move inside, and that puts us very close to that E flat. Okay, now let's move to measure 7. Measure 7 has some particular things that can be helpful. Number 1 is to release the thumb to get out of the way. So if we look at measure 7, we're going to, you can see that the left hand plays the C natural. If I keep my hand in the same position, this is going to collide. So as I go to the G in the left hand on the second beat of measure 7, I'm releasing that thumb out of the way so the right hand can get in there. Becomes even more crucial in measure 8. They become closer. So that alone can clear up some issues for people, because sometimes it's just simply that the thumb stays there and suddenly the right hand feels very jumbled. So looking at situations of repeated notes that are very close in proximity to each other, and really thinking, okay, what can I do to make that situation easy? And one of the things is to really look at, can something release and really move? One of the very, very interesting things that came up in working with Edna on this, she found this, and I thought it was just so amazingly transformative to this passage, and is in one sense kind of unexpected, because the figure melodically maintains the same kind of overall phrase shape. So, you know, we keep going to this offbeat kind of melodic syncopated note. It doesn't really change musically, but physically it changes actually quite a lot. What do I mean by that? It starts out, you have your over shapes. This now becomes, I'm in measure 7, an under shape in the right hand to an over shape. So I'll just deal with the right hand. Under shape, over, under, over. But now as the notes get closer, actually that under shape pulls the thumb too far. So now from the last note of measure 7, we have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 note over shape. And you can try it and really feel the difference if you continue with those under shapes, how difficult that feels. It feels very busy and fussy. It was really a great relief to just stay there and not continue the under-over pattern. So from measure 7, last note, you're going to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Remember, number 5 becomes number 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 probably, getting down to the new note. So that brings us to measure 12. There can be a very subtle fingering change that can facilitate something. I wanted to discuss that. If we start in measure 12, I'm going up in the upper part with 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 5, 3, 1, 5, 3, 1. But here, instead of going to the 5 again, the 4, 2, and moving a little bit inside really puts you here very nicely. So the last 2 notes of measure 12, I would use 4, 2. In the left hand, I would actually use 1, 4. That makes this very close in feeling. And puts you on the new harmony. Now we have another situation. We're now up to measure 14. This came up a little bit in Edna's session, problem-solving session. The notion of when we are sent somewhere, in a way, how much energy do we really need? Here, if we go to measure 14 and we look at the 3rd beat, in the left hand, this is a very close note, sending it. But this one is further. I have to go from here, from that G on the 4th beat, 2nd note, to this D with the thumb. When you're doing something and the hand is very used to something, that moment needs a little attention in order to get it far enough, easily. So I would say that that G right there is a stronger send, sending you over. I'll do it one more time. Sending you over to that D natural. That brings us to, let's go to measure 16. In measure 16, what happens in the upper part is that we have a considerable amount of distance between, if we're in the last quarter note of the measure, between that 2nd finger, this 5th finger, and back to the 2. It's an octave leap, basically. Now, grouping helps enormously here. If I finish on the G but send myself, I can start over to bring myself back. So that's very helpful. One of the things that's most important here is what is the position of the torso and what is the position of the forearm by that time? Because if my torso is here, there's practically no possibility of making that distance. So what's happening here is being conscious a little bit more. I'm getting my torso over there, but along with that, I'm getting my arm close by. The closer I am, the closer that distance feels. Now, in some hands, it might be that the option would be to come back to the thumb and repeat the thumb again. With a good rotation and an extremely lateral movement, it's very nice kind of to go from the 2 right back to the 2. Kind of feels really really nice. I like it. But I could understand that somebody maybe slightly less wide hand or something might prefer in that moment to go 5, 1, 1. The left hand is making a slightly longer undershape. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 note under. And that helps enormously too, to understand that the left hand has its function and is coordinating together with the right hand. I wanted to look, to fast forward a little bit to measure 30. So if we get to measure 30, this is in the area of redistribution, when we take something that's written in the score and assign it to another hand other than what it seems like in the score it should be played with. That's redistribution. And the closest note. When we leap, came up many times in the problem-solving sessions with Edna, how she relates. What is she relating? The closest note, what fingers and the notes, so that the distances feel much closer. As Mary said, shrinking the piano in a certain sense. Obviously that's not true, but our perception of the distance is much smaller. So if we look in measure 30, one of the challenging things if we go from the second beat would be to get all the way down here in the right hand. That's really, really far. But that can be taken very easily by the left hand. So if you see the third beat, we can redistribute that note, those two notes, into the left hand. And that alleviates our needing to go all the way down there with the right hand. Now we're just going this far. Now, when I say closest note, I'm thinking it from this fifth finger on the A flat, which is the last note of B2, into the F sharp. So that becomes a more manageable distance than this note to this note. And certainly in the feel, feels so much easier just to get there. Now, the interesting thing with the upper voice is one could say, well, if you relieved me of my thumb here, why can't I just start on the thumb here? If you were starting the piece and you had no history in the piece, maybe this would be fine. But because the hand does know certain figures and certain standard feels, it feels much better to continue in that pattern, which is, if you were playing this thumb, you would be playing this with the second finger. It feels much better to go to the second finger here. Here again, closest note, going into the downbeat of 31. I can play this as an octave, relieving me from the job of getting that right hand so far down there. Here we don't have much option. All of these I would do very standard fingerings, very standard way of playing it. No redistribution. But I think measure 30 is something worth looking at for the concepts of redistribution and of closest note. Let's go to measure 45. Once again, this is, I think, a very good redistribution also. We can, in 45, taking this as an octave, and right again, since I've explained it, we're just continuing in the same pattern in the upper part. Here's your closest note again. Closest notes. And here I thought that this last beat of 46 is a little bit complicated redistribution, because we're basically starting the fourth beat of measure 46, 1 and 5. The right hand is coming in with the third finger and then taking this interval. Why do I want to take that interval? Because this getting to here seemed a little bit hard and getting back hard, and it's also the return, and you want to be very confident there. I thought that it was really a good idea to take 3 in the upper part. The third 16th note would be 1 and 5, going back to 3, and you can change to 4 in the left hand, and that brings you basically to the return. Much easier than the right hand doing all that work. So that's the redistribution. Let's move to measure 65. 65 doesn't have one absolute solution. So this is interesting when things like this come up, because we do find generally that one solution seems better. We might change it at a different point because we feel or understand something a little bit further, or Edna develops something further and it gives a new insight. But here, it was an interesting thing because I had a student who felt that her hand was too small for the conventional fingering. Why would somebody feel that? We have to look at that first. So we're in measure 65. If we look at the upper part in measure 65, you'll see that if you look at the lower fingering that I wrote there, 1, 2, 5, this C to B flat, 2 to 5, is quite large. Now, of course, let's look at the things that help us not feel stretched. Well, one thing is that double rotation. That's going to help. Another thing is how the shaping continues motion. The other thing is the idea that we can subtly let go of something and not absolutely connect. So the 2 to the 5 can be done if you don't absolutely connect. So it's all of the same motions that I discussed before. The grouping is the same. The shaping is the same. But we do have a slight let go between 2 and 5. But if you try all the, what we like to say, usual suspects, then, and it doesn't solve it, then something else has to be done. It is possible to start this passage with the second finger and do 2, 1, 4, 3, 1, 4, 1, 4. And I thought it was a very interesting point here. Like, one might ask the question, why not just stay on 4? Possible, but not ideal, because what the 4-3 does, it really puts the arm closer to what's coming up. So I hope that you're seeing, and I hope that it excites you to see how much strategy we have to be thinking in our practicing. Like, strategically speaking, wow, that 3 puts this in such a great mechanical advantage versus this, which then is a bigger motion to get here. So we're always kind of going back and forth between those subtleties, but they make a very big difference. Now, when we do something like this, also, we have to realize that some of the rotation changes. So here I'm rotating to the left on the thumb, which is what we always have to do. We can never rotate away from the thumb and play the thumb. The thumb is the finger that always plays, the arm is coming towards it to play straight down. So we have that thumb, it's going to the left. We're going to the right, back to the left, which makes now the 3 a double rotation to the thumb. So you can see there's some subtleties here that are very important, meaning if you tilt on this third finger, it will make it very difficult and really unstable to get to the thumb. So understanding that this is a single, but this is a double to the thumb, creates an awareness that we have to be straight down on that third finger before going to the thumb. It raises the issue also of how important understanding minimizing is, particularly minimizing of the double rotation, because in this moment, if you push off 3 to get to the thumb, that's where it's going to feel unwieldy and not possible. People don't see the possibility how that can go faster. But when you understand minimizing and you understand that the rotation belongs to the finger that you're going to, and that third finger is really what Halman used to term dead on the bottom. There's no push off on that third finger to get to the thumb. That really, whether you're going slowly or faster, really makes it feel like, yes, I see the possibility that can work in speed. People who wonder about speed, very often I find they might be still thinking one note on the double gets them to the next and kind of pivoting on that note. So it's something to look at if it resonates for you or for any of your students. Moving to measure 65. Once again, very nice redistribution to avoid having, here's your closest note again in the left hand, 5 to the thumb. That can also be done as an octave. And once again, that send which gets you there. Let's see. Measure 81. Let's move to measure 81 in the last few moments. We need to get the torso over because once again, we're playing in a rather low register for the right hand to get to. So we have to be very conscious as we're coming in that we get the torso over here. The forearm also has to get us closer to the torso, the forearm close to the body. The other thing in the left hand to be conscious of is what I wrote in 81 on the first beat of the measure, the last 16th note. We need a little bit of a stronger send to get us across that distance. Without that, might have some kind of issue there. How did I know that? Because somebody said it's hard to get to the G. So in looking at that, we saw that sending really helped. And just my final point is, if you're anything like me, and hopefully you're not, I think there's such a relief when one gets to here. But unfortunately, no rest for the weary here, because actually that end note is the beginning of a group. That has to be a start. You're going to it musically, which is why I think it's such sometimes a confusing issue for people, is that we're going to it musically, but physically we're moving from there. And when we do that, it sends us to the chord with a lot more security versus arriving here in the what I call the panic moment, and then what happens? If you go here and all momentum has stopped, then you're going to panic about where to move. Also in the working out process, it's really helpful to send that right hand a little bit ahead of the left. Now, one last point is what's happening rotationally there. Rotationally, the left hand is playing what we would call the hybrid. It's coming over to play straight down, but the right hand has a double rotation. So that's something that, if it's difficult to get to the last chord, could be a factor. So I hope I raised enough points and showed you, a framework for looking at the piece and for solving the different challenges that the piece offers. So I think it is now 11:45, so I think we will end. Thank you so much. I hope that we'll hear a lot of Opus 25 number 12s in the next few months.